All right, hatches, latches, and intake ducts. That is the focus of this video, video number 4 in the BVM T33 old school classic build series. Let's dive back in. All right, so next step in the manual is the engine hatch. So this guy back here. Now previously in the videos, when I was doing some of the install of the carbon on the side here, I had installed this cross brace made of wood. Reason for that is the hatch was kind of spread out too much and wasn't quite fitting on the fuselage nicely. So now we've got a good fit just like previous, but we're going to work on getting this fit. So first step to do here is the pin in the back. Now I'm just trying to decide here if we're going to do one pin in the center or we're going to put one pin on each side. Problem with doing one pin in the center is that the hatch can pivot back here side to side, which I don't really want. Now, of course, when we get our structure all glued on, so the rear part of our fuselage, that's going to stiffen all this stuff up. But right now, if I line this up in the center, I'm just checking this. Yeah, if we line that up in the center, you know what? Once that front is mounted solidly, I think that'll actually work out probably okay. So what I was thinking about was doing a pin here and a pin there, but we're also missing a little bit of our structure here. So probably the center pin, just following the instruction manual makes the most sense. And I think that's what we're going to end up doing. Now, because we've got different generations of kits, we've got lots of parts here, lots of these excess parts for the cockpit area. And just got a message from my friend Joe at RC Custom 3D Printing, and Joe is almost done the cockpit canopy assembly for this aircraft. So possibly, depending on if he makes it here or not, we may see that assembly in this video. So stay tuned for that. I'm very excited. So we got lots of hardware here. Our latches, these two are what we're going to be using. And then our pin here is the back pin. And there's our receptacle. Okay, so basically step number 1 here is we get our hole done up in our hatch where our pin's going through. The position really isn't super critical because you can have extra area around the pin. That doesn't really matter. What matters is the receptacle or the fuselage side of that pin. So also sanded out the contact area here, used a little bit of thin medium CA and got that glued in place. Then what we do is take a little bit of Sharpie marker and paint the end of our little tip there. So when that's painted, we can get this lined up nice and center, touch the back end here of the fuselage, get a little tiny black mark installed there, and then I use my reamer tool and do my hole. Now my hole is always geared towards the center of the fuselage, because then I can slowly adjust this hole to make the hatch fit very nice. So we've got the back end of this hatch fitting beautifully, nice and flush, and very solid. So that is a great lineup there for the hatch. Okay, next step, we got the little receptacle installed in the back of the fuselage behind our locating pin. I initially sanded these guys out to fit our little pins and stuff for our latches. That's what it shows in the manual, just doing a little slot there. Didn't like that very much, so I filled those in with high sol, and now that I know where they're going, we're going to drill a hole in those locations. So we'll get those holes done, and then what we need to do is we need to start transferring those holes onto the fuselage. Okay, so we have our holes done there. So these holes are quite important because you want to make sure that you've got an accurate spot to transfer onto the fuselage right here. So what's going to happen is we're going to get this all lined up and positioned, and then we have to reach through and mark out those holes so they are bang on perfect. Okay, so we've got our holes done up here. So I just held the hatch in place. We did each side at a time, and I got beautiful wife to trace out the little holes there on the other side. So that is perfect. and we've got our holes done. So now we want to get the hatches temporarily installed in the hatch, and we can check how this all fits. So we're just going to use CA to get those temporarily stuck in place. Okay, so we've got the hatch basically fit, and I think I'm happy with everything there. Now, one thing that I did a little bit extra to this was put the extra former we had in this area. Now, I think I'm going to install that in the plane. It's going to be a very good addition. It weighs almost nothing. The only reason that I want to do it is it adds support to the side here. So when we put that former in place right now, it makes the entire hatch perfectly shaped. And I think it's a great addition to this aircraft. Hardly weighs anything. The only thing we have to consider is our flap items that go in this area, but I don't think that's going to be an issue at all. So we won't glue that in yet. We'll just keep an eye out for it, but I think that is going to be perfect. Okay, so manual calls for the use of the little black clips on the receiver portion of the hatch pins. We're going to go a little bit different route, and we are going to use a piece of brass. So the piece of brass is just going to be a little bit cleaner option. The other thing it allows us to do, we are going to install the brass over top of the pin right there, and then we're going to cover this area in high sol, which is going to make a nice solid mounting point for these pins and the hatches. Okay, so we sanded a little bit of an angle on our pieces of brass and put a drop of lube in there and got them installed. Now we're going to mix up some aero epoxy, and we're going to completely enclose the brass pieces inside of aero epoxy, and that's going to strengthen this whole area as well, making the hatch very solid. Of course, we've got everything lined up on the hatch as well, which is going to help. Okay, so there's a shot of our aero epoxy holding the brass pins in. That turned out good. We've got a whole glob there. So once that cures, it is going to be solid. And then we also had a little bit left over, so we did the little locating pin at the back and the actual pin itself on the hatch. So now we're going to let that sit overnight, and we will come back tomorrow. Okay, so we pulled our hatch off. That all worked out really nicely. So next up on the hatch is to come in here and high sol our latches, which we weren't able to access. So we'll get that done. The rest on the fuselage portion's done, and our hatch instructions are complete. Then we're going to move on to our front access hatch, which is this guy here. So we're going to pull all of our parts out and get that ready to go. Okay, so we've got our hatch, which is already pre-cut or pre-done here for us. This is not the cutout piece that we originally had. This is an extra part. And we've got our latch as well too. And then we have all of our little tabbies. These are molded pieces. Now we've got a newer version of the instructions, and then there's the, I guess, the older instructions, but we're just basically working off these guys and those ones. Okay, so we spent some time block sanding our hatch and got that fitting perfectly. Now what I want to do is I want to make sure that I have a nice clean opening before we fit the hatch and the little tabbies on here. So you can see areas like this where we cut it out with our Dremel disc, which are not amazing. So we want to make sure we sand this guy out, because that's going to be our finished surface which we clip against. So I'm going to spend some time sanding this guy out and making it look pretty. Okay, so we taped the hatch in place here, and it's a pretty good fit when it's just taped in place. And then I started working on the clips in there. So I did the 3 on the bottom first, then I did the front one, and we still have the top 3 to do. And I do have the hatch pin latch slot done, but we're going to worry about installing that afterwards. I just want to get these clips done first. Now the clips are pretty simple. They're all a little bit too big, so I've been sanding these down a little bit to make them fit nice and tight, and then just using some thick CA to hold them in place. And once those are in place, we can pull the hatch off, check the fit, and then we'll high sol this along with all of our other stuff tonight. All right, so hatch is fit, and it looks really good. Now one thing I didn't show on camera, it talks about it in the manual, but you heat up your edges here. So the top edge I did and all of the corners, and you basically just fold those corners. So once the corners are heated, you're kind of folding it under, holding it there while it cools, and that just prevents everything from sticking up. So this corner, for example, was sticking up a fair bit, and that's a way to make it nice and smooth. So latch has been kind of temporarily spot glued in place with CA, and we've put a piece of ply underneath the latch. So that ply is going to get spot glued in place, and then we'll high sol that when we high sol or aero epoxy everything. All right, just to show you guys what the hatch looks like here. So there's a bit of a trick to getting this thing on and off. So you start, when you're putting it on, you start on the bottom, work your way forward, and then kind of fold it. And we do the exact reverse when we take it off. So we kind of flex the hatch and pull the top out first, pull the front out, pull the bottom out. Getting it on is the exact reverse. So we get it in place on the bottom, get our front installed, get our top installed, pull the latch back, and missed one of the tabs. There we go. All right, so it's time to aero epoxy all of our progress tonight. So what we do is we mix up some aero epoxy. We'll just go around each of the tabs. We'll go around our hatches as well. On the rear hatch we did yesterday and the front hatch. And we'll make sure we do our piece of wood that we installed right there. And that will be some wicked progress on this aircraft. And when that's done, it looks like we move into the intake portion. Okay, so moving on to the intake ducts. Now, the intake ducts are fairly straightforward, I think, but what we're going to do is we are going to add some carbon tow to these intake ducts. Now, my kit came with a long stretch of carbon tow here. I'm not sure how much is there, but there's a lot. And so we're going to install that on the ducts. Now, what we're going to do first is we're going to sand these ducts down because we do want to paint them afterwards, and we want our epoxy and everything to stick very well to this stuff. So we're going to sand this down with 80 grit all the way around the external. And once that's done, we're going to get our carbon tow installed. So we're going to just put it every couple inches down this intake duct. So probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 wraps, depending on how much we have. And so first step, sand this guy down. All right, so we've got our carbon tow added to both of the intakes. That was a good addition. It'll strengthen these up a lot. And basically what I do when I do this is I spot glue. So I used a 2-foot section on each piece. Just used some CA to spot glue the end, wrapped it around, and then spot glue it again. And then once that's installed all the way, then I just come in and rub the epoxy in and get the epoxy all set up. So those will be painted afterwards, so they will disappear. Now I'm going to glue our secondary former in. Now the reason I'm going to glue this in right now is because to do our carbon tow on the intakes, I mixed up a lot of West Systems 610 epoxy, and I've got a whole bunch left. So it really is a perfect time to get that installed, which is fine. It's going to keep everything nicely in place with our hatch here and everything. And I'm not a huge fan of this movement right here, and this former really helps out with that. So got this all sanded, both sides, and we're going to get it installed. So quite simply, I'm going to put glue all over this guy right here, epoxy. Now this has already been sanded. We did that before, so that's fine. We'll get that installed, and then we'll come in and just do our sides. All right, so lots of gluing done tonight, which is good. There's a front shot there of our former and a little back shot of the former. So not a lot of weight added with that. It basically weighs next to nothing, but it's going to be a great addition for that aircraft. Now obviously I would have liked to glue that in maybe later. I don't know if it really matters, but we do have to work around that a little bit with flaps and the flap servos and such, but I don't think it's going to be a big deal. All right, so we've got our intakes painted here in gray, and we need to paint the inside of the fuselage. So I do want to paint the inside of the fuselage. I was thinking about not painting it, maybe not painting it, kind of went back and forth, and I think I'm going to give it some last thoughts here, but I think we might paint it. Still undecided. I don't know. So basically, if we're going to paint the inside of the fuselage and we want to get underneath the intake ducts, now is the time to do it. Although if we don't get it underneath the ducts, it really doesn't matter a whole bunch. So I don't know, just kind of deciding on what to do here. One of the issues is once we get the ducts in place, getting that servo out is not like super easy. It's possible, but it's not super easy. So I don't know. Okay, so yes, I am going to paint the fuselage, but we're just going to paint from the F4 former, so the main wing former here, forward. The reason we're not going to go back here is we still have to do our hatch back here. We have to have servo mounts back here. This is where the engine's going to be mounting, so not overly concerned about it. But this front area, so from here forward is, once we get those intakes in, is pretty much complete, with the exception of making like some trays and stuff. So what we need to do to prepare for that is we need to take our gear out, take our landing gear out. So we're going to get all that stuff removed, take our air cylinders off, our speed board here, plus probably our servo, get that stuff taken out, and we can paint the inside. Basically prepped around the bottom side, so we're going to spray the bottom side like the gear well openings first, then we'll flip the plane over and we're going to spray the top side. So I'm going to stuff a bunch of paper in the back section here and basically spray this front section. Still need to prep off the outside of the fuselage to spray this area. Now with the fuselage, I'm not so worried about the getting overspray on the fuselage. You know, the entire fuselage needs to be sanded. Nothing sticks to this gloss primer finish right now anyways, maybe the gel coat or whatever it is. So we'll just do some basic prep off, but if we get overspray on it, it's going to come off during the sanding process anyways. All right, so I took all the prep off and our paint is all done. Looks really good. And I mean, we're not painting the exterior of the plane. So what I mean by that is like, it doesn't have to be perfect. We're not making a piano here. So, you know, there's areas on the underside there which are a little bit lighter, but you'll never see that. So, but the general idea here was just to get it nice and solid and gray. Our little prep in the back here worked out good. And then our underside also looks awesome. So that is really good. Now I'm just toying with the idea of painting the intakes a different color. So I'm thinking maybe painting them red because we're going to do red on the scheme. Or gray. I think red would look really good. Okay, so this is about as good a time as any to paint our doors. So our center doors on the main gears, our leg mounted doors on the main gears, these guys here, we are going to be painting those guys green. We're also going to do these doors right here, but we've got to take them off, sand them down, and then paint them. So these guys here I've already sanded a little bit with 100 grit sandpaper, and we're going to spray these green, and they're going to be reinstalled once they're done. I'm not going to worry about the back side of this because that doesn't need to be painted. That's always hidden. So we'll just basically prep it off like that and paint just the leg mounted door. Okay, so we've got our doors, inside doors painted green. We put 2 coats on there and looks good. Camera doesn't really show the color properly. It's much more olive colored than what's showing up in my camera picture. So when you look at the scale, some of the scale pictures and some of the detailed pictures that I've seen of the scale or the scheme that we're doing, the doors are basically painted green, which looks really cool. So anyways, we're gonna let that stuff dry and we will continue or start installing our intakes tomorrow. Okay, so the intakes turned out really nice. I'm happy with them. They're nice and glossy and beautiful looking. So I've put these in the plane and marked out where we need to sand. So we need to sand these areas down right there, and the back, these back pieces are what joins together. And those other little areas are what goes right here in this area. Of course, we need to sand where it contacts the actual intake itself. So we'll sand this side a little bit, and then also sand the little lip on the duct itself. Okay guys, so we're ready to glue our intakes in. So I mixed up some West Systems 610, and that's pretty much what I've almost been using exclusively for this aircraft. So what I'm doing is I am just putting some on the actual intake itself, so the little lip. Now we'll have to do some cleanup here, but I think this is going to be the cleanest way to get this installed. And then before we place this in the model, we will put a little bit on the ribs that this sits on. Now it's going to be a little bit delicate initially because we don't have a great way to hold this in place, but we may be able to just spot glue it with a little bit of CA, and that might work out well. So, okay, so we just placed the intake in its spot. Now there's going to be some cleanup to do on the intake here. I kind of left that ridge up a little bit, which is totally fine. We'll sand that down afterwards, but I just wanted to show you guys that. And I put a little bit of our epoxy on this former right here that supports the intake duct. Now I didn't put any on the joint going in between them yet. We'll do that once we get them kind of both set in place. They're not like super solid because we've just got epoxy holding them here together and on the intake lip. Now I've run some CA down the joint there, and I put a little bit of high sol or 610 over that as well. So what I'll do now is I'll take my gloved finger and we're just going to clean up the intake area. Not that it really matters because we have to go back and clean all that up anyways, but actually, you know what? I'm probably just going to leave that because it's going to be easier to cut off later when it's big and chunky and not flat. So. Okay, so we got the front nose gear back installed. I also painted the back of the air brakes black. So put one coat of paint on there just with a brush, and we'll do another coat. Painted our F3 former there in black just on that little lip. And last thing we did was get our doors, our strut doors, wheel doors maybe, painted green. So those are all done. Again, same green as the other stuff. Looks more olive green in real life than the camera. So we're going to let that stuff cure, and then we'll start reinstalling stuff. So that's pretty much a standstill right now, but once the doors are cured, we'll get things back in place. All right, guys, we just got a special delivery from Joe at rcjets3dprinting.com, and the cockpit is done and it looks amazing. The detail is crazy. This is such a cool addition to this plane. Thank you, Joe, for doing the cockpit. It looks outstanding. And there's a link down below, guys, to Joe's website. Check it out. Obviously, this is not listed on his website, but he does a lot of cool things and amazing, amazing work. So one of the next steps is going to be fitting this to the aircraft. Obviously, the frame is all the stock frame and everything. We've got the cutouts for the little tabs and everything there. So we will spend some time shortly here getting this thing fit. Dang, that looks good. All right, so we've got all of our wheels and doors and everything back installed, and took a little bit of time and did some sanding on the intakes. Now those are roughly sanded out. We've got some filling to do here, but we do have our intake splitter, which goes on the interior side of the intakes, which I think we're working on next. That's one of the next steps in the manual. Okay, so next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna fit the cockpit. I feel like that's a good thing to do because it's just damn good looking. So the way the cockpit works is we have hooks on the rails for the cockpit. So both sides, there's 3 sets of hooks. And a couple specific things here. So the cockpit basically sits almost all the way back like that. The canopy glass still needs a little bit of room there. And that's kind of where everything's going to sit. Now our front portion here, so the way Joe designed this is it comes in from the underside, and the cockpit itself just rests on the front lip there, which is super awesome. Okay, so we've prepared the front portion of our cockpit canopy, decided to just glue this in place. Now, right now the top part is just CA'd to the actual dash portion. So we've roughened all this up. We're going to use some epoxy and glue these two pieces together, and then we are going to glue this to the underside of the front here. Now, where this sits naturally, it doesn't affect the cockpit installation at all. What really affects the cockpit installation is this back hatch. So back hatch is removed, cockpit starts off kind of back there, you engage the hooks and it slides forward. This piece is going to be completely independent, and that'll pretty much live in the aircraft, which is fine. And when we go to paint the aircraft, we'll just prep this off. Okay, so we are ready to start working on the canopy. We opened up our slots here from the underside, just used a very thin diamond Dremel bit. So we got those punched through and then took a file and opened these up a little bit. So our hook goes in there now, and that is good. So one of the downsides with the way that we assembled this was the pan or liner goes on top of the wood frame and takes up a little bit of the space. As you can see there, our hook doesn't have a ton of room. So what we're going to do is we're going to countersink or sand out our little outlined area there, which we've gone in and installed each of our hooks and outlined it. So we're going to basically cut that out, and then that's going to allow the hook to sit down just a fraction more like this, which is going to allow it to lock in the aircraft frame. Okay, so we got all of our hooks mounted on the cockpit. Before we put the hooks in there, we marked out our spaces on the fuselage. So we're going to take our Dremel 409 disc, which is our thin one, and we're going to make our slots here. Now, we're going to go a little bit wider than the black marks, because the black marks are a little bit narrower than our actual arms. There's maybe a representation there for you. So we're pretty close. We'll go a little bit wider. And then on our front ones here, we're fairly close to the edge. So that brings up our piece of fiberglass. So these are the reinforcing pieces that are included in the kit. So they're designed to go underneath the slots like that. Obviously, it'd be fairly important on these front ones to get them installed, because that's going to help it hook into place. Okay, so we're working on our intakes next here. We did a bunch of sanding, got rid of all the gunk from when we joined the intake to the fuselage, and then we came in and sanded this out. So we just cleaned this up with rubbing alcohol, so all the dust is gone, and we are a nice, decent surface. So this roughed up surface is now something that we can install filler on. There's not a ton of work to do here. It's hard to capture this on camera, but there's maybe a shot better with light on. So there's just some areas to fill. Now we want to address this area before we do our intake diverters, because we basically want to get this sanded out, painted, so when we put our intake diverter on, our chrome paint that we're using is essentially done in this area. Now, it doesn't have to be beautiful, because the intake diverter takes care of all that stuff, but we don't want to leave it looking like that. So intake diverter parts, we've taken these out, sanded them down as instructed, so that step is good. The instructions on this step are very, very good, very descriptive and well thought out, so it shouldn't be a problem getting these things mounted. We just need to address our intakes first. All right, so we spent a bit of time doing our filler here on the intakes. Now, we didn't use much. We used a piece of wood and really got rid of a lot of the filler. So that is done. We're just waiting to sand that out. So we're working on the intakes and also getting our scale inlet diverters assembled here. So we have them assembled as per the manual. So basically, pretty straightforward. You get them installed and curved, and you make a left and a right. And then we just take some high sol. I use trusty bent screwdriver to install high sol on both sides, used a gloved finger, and made a nice fillet on each side as instructed. The plans or instructions tell you to use masking tape and everything, really not necessary, and those look wonderful. So we've got those made up. They need to cure. Basically, these get finished before they go in the aircraft, because there's no way to paint behind them and everything once they are installed as shown there. So that's the whole point of doing what we're doing. But we do need to get our notches and stuff done, but that's not critical right now. Getting those glued together was critical. Hi, Nez. All right, so we're just doing our priming on our inlets. Did one quick layer on one side, and we'll do a couple layers on that side, which is our finished side, our visible side. And we'll do some sanding on those as well too. The key here though is we can still paint this outside layer and deal with this outside layer when these are installed, but the underside there and the part of the fuselage that covers up, we've got no access to. So that's why it's important to get those sides done now. And with our inlets all cured, we're going to take some sandpaper and get these guys sanded and smoothed out. Okay, so we've got our backside of our intakes painted chrome, and that's the color or finish that we're doing on the actual fuselage itself. And our intakes are all sanded out now and smooth. So we will end up painting chrome on this area right here because we don't have any access to that area, and then we will probably paint the intakes this side and the actual diverters once we're painting the fuselage, but we want to again get all those hidden areas done. Now the next step here is you basically install your diverters, line it up with the panel line right there, and you mark the center of the diverter. And then what you're doing is you're matching up your little notch right there with your center line, and that gives you your location of your 3 channels. Okay, so here's some shots just for reference from Bob's, one of his older models. So anyways, just figured I would share those with you. These are from the pictures that Kelly gave to me. Again, thank you, Kelly, for those. Very, very helpful to see some nice close-up shots instead of just the manual pictures. So we've got our intake here, our baffle painted and sanded and fit. So I think the next thing to do is we're going to paint this area chrome. I don't really care about any of the overspray because that's going to have to get sanded down anyways. So we're just going to take this over to our paint area, give this a quick spray in this area, and then work on getting this guy fit. So essentially what we're doing is we are placing this in there. We're going to put probably some CA to hold it, and then we're going to glue it from the back side. Now the back side, you basically have access to all the tabs you can see there, so we can spot glue that in place and then get it firmly glued with aero epoxy without any issue. Okay, so we've got both of our intakes ready to go. I didn't spend a whole bunch of time sanding these areas. You can see there's a couple pinholes there still, but those all get completely hidden. So we're ready to glue our intakes in. We've got this all painted all the way around the full intake side. So essentially that's done. All we're doing right now is we're painting the face of our diverters in chrome, and those will be installed, and then we can shoot those when we go to do the full paint job as well. So, but at least we'll have a nice base of chrome on there. So anyways, next view is going to be us gluing those intakes in. Okay, so our intakes are spot glued in place, and just use some thick CA and kind of grab those with pliers, pulled them through nice and tight, and put some thick CA and kicker on those little tabs. Now we'll go back and we're going to glue those little tabs with some aero epoxy. And these, we are going to refinish these as well. So we've got our little glue tabs there, and there. They're probably going to show up on camera. But we will get those filled in with some pinhole filler, and we will paint this entire area when we paint the fuselage. But one of the last things I want to do here is make a nice fillet seam or fillet joint between the fuselage and the intake there. So we'll do that with aero epoxy as well, little gloved finger, and we will get those areas filled up. So that's going to make a nice smooth transition there, and it'll look like it's all built in one piece. So those look awesome, nice step, but we'll get those glued next, and we will glue the inside as well. All right, so we're just high-soling our joints here. So I just use a good old trusty bent screwdriver, which, in case you didn't know, is the most useful tool in my toolbox. Thanks, Trusty. And we're just laying it into the corners there, and then what we'll do is I'll just take my gloved finger and make a nice fillet along the intakes, and it will look fabulous. So once that's cured and we repaint those, it'll basically disappear. All right, and there's a final shot of the fillet joints. So same thing all around, top, bottom. And the back side, which you've already got the hatch and everything in place for our pictures here. But the back, we put high sol on those tabs coming through the fuselage. So huge success in this beautiful T33 build. Next thing we're moving on to is the wings. So just a reminder, guys, to check out the lighter side of RC after dark. Basically, the lighter side of RC after dark, you get to see 2 hours of live streams here from the shop. The thing about the after dark is generally you're seeing things weeks in advance before the actual videos come out. So it's a kind of a cool opportunity to see some of the new projects in advance here at the shop. The other thing is channel membership, which is pretty cool. We introduced it about a month ago, and what channel membership is it allows you to get an early view of all the videos. So as an example, today, as of right now, there are 3 videos in the channel membership queue. One of them is the Sweewin 400 test run, which comes out in about a week and a half. Then we've got tomorrow's video, which is the SU30, video number 6. And then we've got the T33 video, which is the one previous to the one we're recording right now. So anyways, channel membership, cool opportunity to see videos well in advance. It is a paid service, but there is links down below. So that is going to wrap up our T33 video for this episode. We made some awesome progress. I'm excited to get into the wings. The wings are a huge stepping stone, and I think they're going to be a ton of work, but some fun details happening in the wings. So thanks guys for tuning in, and we will see you in the next video.